Isn't it? Oh, I can't see the live thing. Welcome, everybody. It's Dave Pellowe here, and you're watching Pellowe Talk. And tonight we have three fantastic guests, as always. There's no exception. We have Senator Eric Abetz, Bernard Gaynor, and Evelyn Rae joining us. But first, I want to share with you some very, very surprising news, and that is the revelation that Don Brown, a Queensland member of the Labor Party, doesn't think churches should receive government money. So he's put out a tweet on Friday which says, "The hits keep on coming. No money for state roads and now giving taxpayers money to churches who don't even pay taxes. Deb Frecklington, opposition leader in Queensland, thanks for the 2 free kicks today." This was a response to an article about funding promised by Deb Frecklington, and it was about the Cage Youth Foundation. The Cage Youth Foundation is a social enterprise with government-approved charity status, which provides counselling, school breakfasts, workshops and mentoring programs, youth suicide prevention support, and work readiness courses, among other community programs for teens and adolescents. According to their website, CAGE is an acronym for Creating a Good Environment, and the not-for-profit's NFP's vision is to ensure that Redlands youth, Redlands is a part of southeast Queensland, ensure that Redlands youth and families experiencing disadvantages, hardships and isolation are identified, connected and supported through practical, innovative and person-centred services. Now, local federal Member of Parliament, Andrew Laming from the LNP, posted a screenshot of Don Brown's similar comments also on Facebook, since removed, and had this to say: "Just gutted to see the Capalaba MP spend his Friday night SHIT canning the Cage Youth Foundation, Redlands' best youth skilling service." In response to Don Brown MP's snide remarks, Linda Grieve, Cage's director, replied, "Excuse me, Don, how long have you actually been in Redlands? It's not a church. That self-funded charity has been providing support in Redlands for over 19 years for our young people and families. Don't use us in your negative, backstabbing, bullying practices. It's offensive." Some of the other comments beneath the Facebook page said, "Your government has not delivered on roads." Gary said, "The good work churches do in the community more than make up for any tax they don't pay. I'd say better value for money than if the government tried to do it cheap." Cheap electioneering stunt, though. Rick said, "Bit of a cheap shot, Don, church bashing. Supporting an organisation supporting local youths through mentoring, counselling, breakfast clubs, etc. can only be a good thing. Disappointing how our local, state and federal MPs mudsling so much." Rick said, "Don, they also do an awesome job filling the gaps in our society the government can't fill. Just don't think this particular post shows you in a good light." Adam said, "Are you serious? These guys do a wonderful job for our community. This is a very low blow, Don, and very petty." The election promise for funding is a paltry $50,000 to relocate, to move a church hall from where it is onto the Cage's premises, which Mrs. Frecklington said was part of the LNP's plan to boost social and economic strength. I find it remarkable in this modern era of bountiful tolerance and pluralism that a government MP should be so oblivious as to not even be capable of blushing when manifesting such religious intolerance and bigotry. One could be forgiven for concluding he harboured a now not-so-secret proclivity for Christophobia. Of course, this could be easily disproved by him producing evidence of similar levels of hostile commentary towards the tax-free status of, let's say, trade unions, which do not pay tax on the vast quantities of cash they receive in membership fees and donations, exactly like churches. An inconsistent level of antipathy would seem to indicate religious bigotry, which is intolerance towards those who hold different opinions from himself, inasmuch he only publicly criticises the tax-free status of Christian not-for-profit organisations. Instead, Brown offered his extraordinary attack couldn't be motivated by Christophobia because he's a Catholic and was only concerned about the $0 for state roads versus $50K to move a church hall. Neighbouring Member of Parliament in Queensland, Mark Robinson, summarised Brown's apparent discrimination demonstrated need for the federal bill protecting religious freedom. He said, So, Don, your faith leads you to believe that Labor governments should discriminate against all faith-based welfare programs, the Cage, Salvos, Catholic school chaplaincy, but you're not faith-phobic. You are the reason we need the LNP Federal Religious Protection Bill. Of course, a possible alternative explanation could be not religious bigotry per se, but a problematic level of ignorance of the accepted wisdom across the political spectrum around public policy regarding organisations such as unions, churches and sporting groups, which are registered as not-for-profit tax purposes. As a Labor MP, Don Brown may also justifiably fear the backlash from the unions he represents more than Christian voters in his electorate if he did comment negatively on the union's tax-free status. It's no secret how much unions donate to Labor election campaigns, so such fear wouldn't be irrational, but biting the hand that feeds you would be. For those MPs who don't understand why churches are exempt from paying tax on offerings, donations and income from other sources, allow me to educate you on what your primary, secondary and tertiary education failed to. If you're a radical secularist at this point, you probably won't allow the facts to get in the way of your latent prejudice, so maybe toddle off to The Guardian and find something there to confirm your bias and don't listen any further. Taxpayers, who MPs claim to be concerned about getting value for money, take money they've already paid tax on and donate it or pay it to community organisations such as sporting clubs and churches to do good in the community. Why this is of benefit to the society as a whole and why governments across the Western world agree to not tax that money again is because NFPs provide exponentially far more value and benefit to the community than the government could with the same revenue they forego by not taxing them. Ultimately, it will be up to the residents of Capalaba and neighbouring electorates to decide whether they want another $50,000 spent on state roads instead of helping community groups, which do critically important social good, the likes of which are done and done better by the Cage Youth Foundation and faith groups. If Don Brown MP's commentary doesn't represent the values and policy posture of the Queensland Labor Party and her government, it would now appear urgent Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk force her sniping backbencher to apologise to the Cage and churches across his local electorate and the state for his ill-considered display. Well, that's Queensland news, but now I'd like to welcome from Tasmania the very good Senator and now a friend of mine, I'm very proud to say, Senator Eric Abetz. Thank you for joining us tonight, Eric.
A pleasure, David, and good to be on Pellowe Talk.
Now, for those who didn't actually attend the Church and State Summit, you gave an excellent keynote speech on the main night, Friday night, all about the need for a virtuous population to make democracy of any value at all. So that was, I think, a very profound truth. Have you had any other feedback on that from that night?
Not much feedback, but when people stop to think about how our democracy works, they do realise that there are a lot of conventions and civility built into it to make it work. And so, for example, our Parliament does have standing orders to ensure that debate occurs in a reasonably civilised manner. And if you didn't have standing orders and people were just shouting at each other all day, then of course there'd be no legislation passed. And so there needs to be a civility, not only in your constitution and standing orders, but accepted amongst each other without it being written down. And that, I think, is the great strength of our Western democracies. And where does that civility find itself emerging from? It's the Judeo-Christian ethic.
Now, I find it almost remarkable. I think a lot of people would find it remarkable that you might suggest that the Australian Parliament has civil debates. There's a little bit of, I guess, reputation for some not so civil conversation going on in there. I guess we could compare it to much worse parliaments that we see on TV from time to time, where fists are flying and people are diving across desks to the other side of the chamber. And I don't think I've ever seen that on Question Time. But do you really think the Australian lower house and upper house are very civil, or do you think there's probably a room for a lot of improvement?
Of course, there's room for improvement in relation to the Parliament's behaviour and indeed each and every individual's behaviour in the Parliament. But overall, that which you get to see on TV screens as opposed to what actually occurs, 95% plus of the time, there is a great degree of civility and we listen to each other in silence, but every now and then the theatre of Question Time or a hotly debated issue attracts certain emotions, and then people let themselves down, let their party down, let the community down, let the Parliament down. But I've got to say, overall, I think we are a relatively well civilised Parliament.
Now, one of the topics I wanted to start with this evening is China. And specifically, Australia has moved to now officially say, not that, hey, guys, we think you should probably just read the rules again about maritime law. They've actually come out and said, you've read them wrong, and your occupation of that particular, I can't remember the geographic regions, I'm sure you can name them, but your particular building islands in the middle of the sea and claiming it's Chinese territory in the middle of major international shipping lanes, that's downright illegal and you're wrong and stop it. That's a big, big change in Australia's diplomatic position. Likewise, America probably did that first and moved from a neutral position to a negative position, saying also that's wrong. What are the risks and what are the merits of a new Cold War with the major communist threat of this century?
The risks and benefits, I suppose, we can discuss together. The lesson of world history is that if you allow bullies, belligerent bullies, to get away with small steps, they'll take bigger steps. And then ultimately, let's say, be it the Soviet Union, it took 70 years before some semblance of democracy and freedom returned. In the case of Nazi Germany, you had small geographic gains made without any resistance, and that just emboldened the bully. And what did it mean at the end? Millions of lives lost. And so the lessons of history are there for all to see. And that is why I, for one, was somebody that was wanting us to call out China a lot earlier. And so, for example, David, under the leadership of Malcolm Turnbull and Julie Bishop as Foreign Minister, they were promoting an extradition treaty between Australia and Communist China. I was the crazy brave one in the party room to get up and say, you do that and I'm crossing the floor. This is a country that is a communist dictatorship, does not believe in the rule of law, has the death penalty, 99.9% of criminal trials end in conviction. I'm just not going to have a bar of it. Thank goodness that then helped derail the extradition treaty. If I or anybody were to suggest an extradition treaty today, I'm sure they would be absolutely howled down. And that is where I think there has been a shift in sentiment, because the bullying nature of China has become exceptionally apparent. We called China out, we didn't call China out. All we wanted was an international investigation into COVID-19. And we were then immediately targeted by the Chinese, but we're not alone in that regard.
I just wanted to take a short distraction for a second and welcome the viewers to the show, and feel free to leave some questions and some comments. We'll throw them up on the screen and try to deal with them if we're not moving too fast to slow down and take a breath. But yeah, welcome. Please share the show, invite your friends to join. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. You can watch live on Facebook and YouTube, and that'd be really great if you just help us bring other people. This is Pellowe Talk, not Q&A. Now, Senator Abetz, I think you make a fantastic point, probably one I hadn't considered, by comparing China's brazen seizure of land in the middle of the shipping lanes, or created artificial land in the middle of the shipping lanes and then claimed it as sovereign territory. Comparing that to the small, seemingly small but incremental steps that Nazi Germany made while the rest of the world tried to appease them, I think that's a really, really good point. I personally think we do need a Cold War. I think China's become far too menacing, far too aggressive, and they are certainly baring their teeth and snarling, threatening us, Australia specifically, but not only Australia. They really, really don't like having anybody disagree with them and seem to want to be dictators of the whole world. Exactly how imperialistic do you think they are? I mean, certainly we see the claims on territories that are highly disputed, like Hong Kong and Taiwan and Tibet. How much further can they go? Is that a silly question given the lessons of history?
China has clearly been reaching out to the rest of the world, so their Belt and Road Initiative, so-called, is into the Pacific Islands, it's into Asia, it is into Africa. I've spoken to people from European countries where they see the same sort of influence like China is having in Australia through the Confucius Institutes. And so there seems to be no country, no territory where they do not seek to have a degree of influence, and especially with Belt and Road Initiatives and things of that nature, Confucius Institutes, because of the money that rolls in, they then compromise, be it, let's say, a university in Australia, for example, possibly one in your state, David, or the South Pacific Islands or Sri Lanka, where they had to give up a port to China because they could no longer service the debt. So these are the influences they're seeking to have, not just in a defence posture, which they claim. This is very assertive, I would say aggressive posturing right around the world. So, and look, what did we see from the World Health Organization even, where at the beginning they were claiming that COVID-19 was not transmissible between humans, that it was racist to close your borders. They were singing to the tune of the Chinese. China is now on the United Nations Human Rights Committee. You know, give me a break. They persecute the Uyghurs, the Falun Gong, the Buddhists, the Christians, freedom lovers in Hong Kong. You name it, they're into everybody. And yet they are now sitting in judgment among some others on human rights matters around the world. So they are seeking a lot of influence in circumstances where their own national behaviour is such that they do not warrant the representation that they have on these international bodies.
Let's bring in our other guests now. I'd like to get their thoughts on that. We've got a question for you, Senator Abetz, but I'm going to ask the other two first, this same question, and that'll give you time to ask it. It might be a bit of a gotcha question, but I think you can handle anything. Bernard Gaynor, welcome to this evening's show. So fantastic to have you, a regular contributor to The Good Source, with your own show, The Bernard Gaynor Show, looking for a perhaps better name. Yeah, welcome.
It's good to be on, Dave.
I don't think there's anything wrong with The Bernard Gaynor Show as your show's name. There's some excellent news that we're going to talk about with you a little bit later on, but first we're going to talk about China. And also welcome to Evelyn Rae. Evelyn Rae is a fantastic regular contributor to Cauldron Pool, one of Australia's leading conservative news and commentary websites. Thank you for joining us tonight, Evelyn Rae.
Thanks for having me.
Do I have to say Evelyn Rae all the time, or can we go with Evie?
It does not bother me. Yeah, I think you went with Eve last time. It's fine.
I did. We'll mix it up. So how have you been?
Yeah, doing well. Just
You did a
getting
good
by.
video on feminism just recently.
I don't know about good, but I gave it my best shot. Yeah,
Well, you got to start somewhere.
that's right.
No, it was a good video. Don't worry.
Thank you.
Look, the question Timothy Armstrong asks, if we can just throw that back up, thoughts. And we'll start with you, Bernie, and then Ev before we come back to Senator Abetz. But thoughts on totally breaking all ties with China. No trade. I believe, Timothy says, like past economies, we will find a way. We will recreate local manufacturing. Interested in the Senator's view. But we'll get the panel's view, starting with Bernard. What do you think?
Sure. Well, look, I'm totally in favour of rebuilding Australia's ability to manufacture its own goods. That's a great idea. I'm not so in favour of the idea of totally breaking off all relationships with China. There is a big problem that the world faces with China, obviously, but I don't think it's going to help overcome those problems by shutting the door to China. It's a mutually beneficial relationship if it's managed correctly, and I think it would be wrong to totally shut the door to trade with China. I think just talking about those geopolitical realities with China, I just want to make one point which is not often made or understood. This is one reason why we should be concerned about China's aggressive military posturing, and that's its demographics are quite worrying. There are approximately 45 million more males in China below the age of 50 than females. That's 45 million men who will
I'm
never
not
have
hearing
family.
anything.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
I can hear you fine. Are you not getting audio, Eric?
I can hear you, and I heard Evelyn, but I'm not hearing Bernard.
Oh, okay. At all?
No, not at all.
We'll have to summarize it for you then.
I was just making the point. There are 45 million more males in China than females. That's 45 million men who will never have a family. And one day, I think China might say the way to solve the social unrest that this is going to cause is by sending those people in a certain direction. And that's something we should be very worried about.
Evelyn, what do you think? Senator Abetz, what Bernard was just saying then, it's really strange you're not getting his audio, but you are getting ours. He was essentially saying that there's 45 million more men than women in China, and he's worried about what they're going to do with all of those, and it's essentially sending them out of the nation and into the rest of the world. Is that a good summary, Bernard?
Well, 45 million men who can't have a family creates a lot of social problem and unrest, and one way to solve that problem is to send them somewhere else.
So the social problems that will create in China are solved by sending them somewhere else. Evelyn, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think what Bernard said about the managing relationships, I think that's the key. At the moment, I don't think it's been managed well. I mean, have a look at what happened with the whole COVID matter. Peter Dutton in April was massively criticised by the Chinese spokesperson down in Canberra. He was called a bigot because he said that he didn't feel like it was handled well. And then you have to look in, I think it was in May, the embassy, the Chinese embassy in Canberra also released a very sort of almost bullying, sort of threatening sort of statement saying that if you, like the Australian government, decide to do an independent inquiry into COVID, that they might start affecting our economy by not purchasing our wine, and they actually use that as an example, or our beef. They were the two examples that were issued. So I think it all comes down to managing the relationships. And I think that you're right in saying that to cut all those ties, like go cold turkey, would probably be detrimental to our economy because we've relied upon it for so long. But I do think that there needs to be a reform in our relationship with China, and that we need to sort of take a stand to not be bullied anymore, because like any sort of bully, once they get a little bit and they get a taste, they keep coming back. You only have to look at people in the prison system to see a practical example of that. Once they pick somebody who's weak, they will target them. And I think Australia need to be careful not to come across as weak. So that's what I think.
And so what do you think, Eric? Totally break ties with them, zero trade, or wean off them gradually? Or is there another option?
It makes good sense not to put all your eggs in the one basket, and to a certain extent I think we may have had an over-reliance on China as an export market for our goods. But look, let's keep in mind China only buys our products for one reason: good quality, reliability of supply, and at an appropriate price. So they don't do it as a favour to us, they do it as a favour to their own economy, to their own people. And therefore, if there were to be a trade war between us, I think they would be cutting off their nose to spite their face. My view is that we should not be over-reliant on any export market, and therefore pursuing other potential markets vitally important. For what it's worth, I'm the Australian patron of the India-Australia Strategic Alliance, which was set up about 7-8 years ago, and I was there at the beginning because I saw the need for us to diversify and look to other markets. And of course, India is a growing economy, a growing population. We have to manage our relationship with China, and part of our annual talks on matters economic, etc., we used to have a human rights element to that. For the last 5 or so years, China has refused in any way, shape or form to engage on the issue of human rights. My own view is that once China said that, we should have said, hold on a moment, part of the deal was that we would engage in a human rights dialogue. And look, I for one was one of those people that believed that as China liberalised its economy, there would follow personal liberalisation and democratic reform. And the reason a lot of us believed that at the time was that that is exactly what happened with Taiwan, where it started off as a military dictatorship under Chiang Kai-shek. It then slowly liberalised. It's now a fully functioning democracy. There are personal freedoms. There is the rule of law. And we were hoping that that approach and evolution in Taiwan would be replicated in mainland China. It did occur right up until Xi Jinping became the president, and he has now become quite regressive in his approach, addressing his National Party conference saying he's a Stalinist. It's about Marxism, the camps for the Uyghurs, the repression now of house churches, the Falun Gong, and so the list goes on. There is an indication that China is regrettably regressing in that development, and we should have been, I think, a lot stronger at the very beginning. So, for example, the fact that the government some few years ago was actually countenancing an extradition treaty with China was, for me, completely unthinkable. But they were the sort of vibes being given out by Canberra, and might I add, a lot of other Western countries as well, that we should be trying to placate China and they would then come on board. What we have seen is that our softness to China has been abused by China. And when I say China, for the record, let's be very clear, I'm talking about the Chinese Communist Party dictatorship. Correct. And not the Chinese people who are labouring under the oppression of that communist dictatorship.
Agreed.
So that, I think, is an important distinction to make.
It is. We don't want anybody to misunderstand that. Look, in just a second, I want to actually have a chat about free trade agreements and some of the strings that are attached to those beyond the question of tariffs. But first, I want to invite everybody to become a supporter of The Good Source. The Good Source exists completely freely without any paywall or cost barriers whatsoever. We want to bring education as a solution to bad government. We actually think if voters get smarter, then they can decide for themselves. We want to inoculate the public, the teenagers, the adolescents, and those people who just don't care about voting. We want to inoculate them against easy manipulation by big party marketing budgets and corporate media agendas. And the best way to do that is to encourage and equip people to think for themselves, to decide exactly what their values are, and then to seek representation from their local candidates. But they can't do that if they don't know anything about the issues. And so between elections, we need constant commentary and news sources and education, which we're bringing not only with articles, but also with video shows like this most days of the week now, and podcasts as well for those people who just don't read the news and don't read articles. And some of the political junkies will love it, but then there's other people who are going to be able to consume a podcast on the way to work or while they're riding a bike or something like that. So if you want to get behind that, we receive no taxpayer funding, as the hashtag says, not Q&A. And we'd just love to have your support as well. And one of the privileges of being a member is you'll get to see the occasional behind the scenes recording of interviews, the discussions before and after, the bit that doesn't make the final edit. So yeah, thank you very much for doing that. If you head to goodsource.news, subscribe to the newsletter, and if you can put your hand in your pocket for $5, $10, $20 a month, that would make a huge difference. And you'll be helping other people who genuinely can't afford anything to keep getting this kind of long-term support. So with the question of free trade, we've seen recently that negotiations with the United Kingdom now no longer part of the European Union. We need new trade agreements, but they want to slap some conditions on us. If we agree to certain tariff-free trade, which I think in principle is a good idea. I've been called a traitor by some for not wanting to protect Australian industry with tariffs, but we can debate about that another time. Assuming free trade is a good thing, what I'm not prepared to accept is the British dictating to us that we have to meet certain environmental policies and certain gender equality policies. Since when does free trade agreements give other nations the right to dictate to us what our domestic policy will be on environment and equity? Senator Abetz, I guess that question's for you to speak to first off.
Look, ultimately, free trade agreements are determined between the two countries or the countries involved, and if the requirements of the other country are such that they are incompatible with our aspirations, with our beliefs, then we don't enter into an arrangement. I'm with you. I think things like climate change, gender equality and things of that nature should be left out of the equation, especially when you are dealing with a country such as the United Kingdom and Australia, where they both have the rule of law. We will have slightly different nuanced positions, but for the United Kingdom to say we'll only buy your wheat, for example, if you believe, let's say, that every toilet should be transgender or something of that nature, well, I've got to say, if that is what the United Kingdom wants to foist upon us, I would say, look, thanks, but no thanks, and walk away. So free trade agreements are an agreement, as the title tells us, and therefore you have to agree to the terms and conditions. But trying to foist that on so early on in the negotiations, I don't know if it was just a bit of kite flying by the United Kingdom. I hope it was, and I hope that they dropped that sort of nonsense.
Turn of phrase.
I hope they dropped that nonsense from the serious negotiation, which ultimately ought to be for the mutual benefit of the people of the United Kingdom and Australia, that which the United Kingdom does best is made available as cheaply as possible to the Australian people, and that which we do best is made available as cheaply as possible to the people of the United Kingdom. And as a result, both of our standards of living can in fact be increased.
Now, Bernard, what do you think? We've just spoken about the willingness to put conditions on China to do trade with us, to lift their standards in human rights, etc. Is it unreasonable to then refuse a neighbouring country, another country wanting to do trade with us, the same opportunity to have input on our domestic policy?
Absolutely not. And I'm quite surprised to hear this. I was not aware of it, Dave. But are you sure it's a free trade agreement with the UK or with the EU? I thought the UK left the EU for these very reasons. That's what the people voted.
That's precisely to the point. Sorry, Senator Abetz, are you still not hearing Bernard?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not hearing you, Bernard.
And I'm not going to have to
reader.
Just do this, nod and smile.
I'll do some
essentially, Bernard saying, "Are you sure you got that right? The UK and not the EU?" Yes, that's exactly right, Bernard, and your point is well made. It is bizarre that they are now trying to negotiate these kind of woketivism clauses on us after leaving for the same reasons. But yes, it is the UK.
Yeah, just in theory, I think free trade agreements make a lot of sense. But of course, the practical reality is that every country has different standards. There's different wage conditions, and the theory never takes into account the national interest of being able to build your own products and the security that provides, whether it's in a pandemic like we're experiencing at the moment, or in case of military necessity. There's lots of reasons why countries should be able to, or a country like Australia should be able to produce its own stuff, and we want to look after its own national interests in relation to any free trade arrangements. So I fully endorse Senator Abetz's views on that, even though he can't hear me.
Bernard's just fully endorsing your comments. There's more, obviously, but he's like, good stuff. Shall we move to Evelyn, or did you have something else to wrap up, Bernard?
Happy with that.
Evelyn, what do you think? Are you a big economic theorist?
Not really. It's a bit out of my field of expertise. But I think the one thing that I sort of got from all of that is, like, I think that a lot of it comes down to division. I think the left love to divide, and there's no better way to divide than using wokeness, and they just infiltrate it into everything. Like, they're putting it into trade tariffs. Like, come on, like, if anything else, they are extremely resourceful and quick to think. It's just their MO, and I think that it's really important that people see through that. And if they can't see through it, like Senator Abetz said, walk away, because it's not good to get caught up in that nonsense. Once you start there, and once you start saying, okay, sure, yep, we'll make sure we're economically and, tied to them, and we have all these environmental procedures, what will then happen next? What else are they going to come after? Because like any person who lives in perpetual victimhood, they seek it and they try to find it. So if we give them that, they're just going to keep coming for something else, and it will just never end. Yep.
You can follow tonight's guest panelists on Twitter. You can find them, and in their bio, you'll find all the rest of their links, website, etc. We have Senator Abetz, which sounds very much like Abbott. I can laugh because I always get people's names wrong. We have Evelyn Rae and Bernard Gaynor. That's Senator Abetz _ Evelyn Rae and Bernard Gaynor, and they have some very good Twitter timelines. So engage with them, say good day, and tell them what you think of tonight. If you're also on Twitter, it's a good place for conservatives to be, to try and dilute the leftist crowding that happens there. Bernard, you got some good news about you recently, and Mark Powell wrote a great article about you on The Good Source. A true freedom fighter and justice warrior returns fire. I hope you like the photo I chose for you.
I think you should do the pose right now.
That's very awesome. And there's a good reference in there to the rats of Tobruk and that kind of bloody-minded determination which they displayed, and hence the context photo at the back there. But in essence, let me read the quote, which is quoted from your own article on your blog, bernardgaynor.com.au. So the following summary of what's gone on: Gary Burns has been bankrupted. I trust everybody watching knows who Gary Burns is, but Bernard, you can give us the background after we get to the bottom of this list. The New South Wales Anti-Discrimination Board, ADB, has been forced to admit that Gary Burns lodges vexatious complaints. Gary Burns has been found by the New South Wales Civil and Administrative Tribunal, NCAT, to have made statements against your solicitor that were untrue and without foundation, and that these statements were malicious, insulting and offensive, and that they, prima facie, were capable of constituting contempt. The New South Wales Law Society action against your solicitor was dismissed with costs. The ADB has admitted to you, Bernard, in writing that it failed to meet its own statutory duties under the Anti-Discrimination Act 1977 in New South Wales. Law reforms have been commenced by Mark Latham in the New South Wales Parliament to address systemic abuses by the ADB, and the New South Wales anti-discrimination system has been found to be unconstitutional by the High Court of Australia. And Magistrate Nancy Hennessy has been forced to recuse herself from matters involving Gary Burns after evidence was presented that she'd been involved in private conversations with him. She's no longer responsible for the section of the tribunal that deals with anti-discrimination matters. Now, free speech is probably one of the most central planks for a virtuous democracy, for a democracy that doesn't devolve into tyranny. So I'm absolutely thrilled at some of this progress that has been made. Bernard, can you just take some moments to give us some background and without taking too long, give us the short version of exactly why all of that list of bullet points is so momentous in the battle for free speech and justice in the Australian democracy?
Yeah, well, thanks, Dave. And I think, in a nutshell, that bullet list shows that Conservatives can win if they dig in and fight. And that's exactly what I've done. And it's not just been by myself. I've had wonderful legal support. I've had fantastic support at home from my wife and children and my extended family. And I've had thousands of Australians encourage, assist and donate to help with this fight. It's cost about $400,000 to achieve all of these things. But the point is, 5 years ago, I was facing over $1 million in fines from the anti-discrimination industry. I was facing 37 complaints from serial litigants. Gary Burns, a homosexual activist who describes it as his work to lodge complaints. He describes himself as an anti-free speech campaigner. I've been bombarded with vicious, insulting, derogatory, malicious communications from him, where he blatantly and brazenly stated that he was lodging complaints to bankrupt me. And all along he's been aided and abetted by the New South Wales anti-discrimination industry. And I guess 5 years ago, Gary Burns and the anti-discrimination industry thought they were going to steamroll me, but they haven't. And it's been a complete catastrophe for the anti-discrimination industry in New South Wales. In fact, none of the complaints against me have been substantiated, and the only people who have been found to have broken the law in this completely farcical and highly expensive saga, which the taxpayers have probably paid millions of dollars for, have been people working in the anti-discrimination industry. So it's a complete catastrophe for the thought police and those who think that they should be able to use the power of the states to monitor what we think and believe. But the battle's not over. I've still got 4 more complaints to face. I'm still involved in hearings in the NCAT in New South Wales, in the local court in New South Wales, in the Supreme Court in New South Wales, and in the High Court of Australia. So there's a long way to go, but I think victory is in sight. And then once I've got through this hurdle, then the attention really will turn to the role that the taxpayer-funded activist bureaucrats at the Anti-Discrimination Board have played in this complete disaster. I mean, these people claim to be unbiased and efficient public servants. They are marching in the Mardi Gras while they're investigating complaints about my views of the Mardi Gras. They are completely partisan. They should all be sacked as far as I'm concerned. Yeah.
Senator Abetz, just a couple of the quick points Bernard made there was essentially the only people that have been found to have actually done something wrong, despite so many complaints against himself, have been the members of the anti-discrimination industry. And the last thing he said was that there's, some of the people investigating complaints about his comments on for example, the gay Mardi Gras were people who then went and participated in the Mardi Gras. So there's been certain questions about how they've been behaving. From your perspective, what do you think of these milestones that have been achieved in Bernard's particular many cases, and what does it say about our prospects of seeing some kind of renewal and reformation of the anti-discrimination industry in Australia to stop being weaponized against democratic freedom of political expression?
These milestones of which you speak are milestones that have come far too late and at far too great a cost to people such as Bernard Gaynor. Freedom of speech is fundamental, and sure, you can't defame people, you can't cry fire in the middle of a crowded theatre, but apart from that, sensitivities will be upset from time to time with robust discussion, but that is why there is some substantial truth, and we need to grab hold of this again. And there was a saying that I was taught at primary school: when somebody had called you a name, the teacher would say, "Sticks and stones will hurt my bones, but names will never hurt me." And so if you have a disagreement or people say something with which you take offence or with which you dislike, well, that's life. Get used to it, toughen up, and engage on the issues and not so much on the emotions. But it seems these days that feelings trump facts, and if we keep going down that road as a society, we will end up in a position that will be of no benefit to anybody, because ultimately facts and truth will out. And that is why a good, robust discussion, especially as part of our Western liberal democracy, based on the Judeo-Christian ethic, has got us where we are today, basically the envy of the world, because we have allowed people to make pretty horrid claims from time to time, such as people that claimed that the world was flat were shown to be wrong, and people were strong enough to come out and say, no, the facts would indicate that they're not. And they were pilloried for it and dealt with very harshly. And we as a society learnt the lesson from that, to say sometimes the lone voice might actually be right. Winston Churchill was the lone voice before World War II, saying appeasement is not the path to go. And he was pilloried and ridiculed until finally reality hit and people said, oops, he was right. But just imagine if Winston Churchill would have been completely shut down at the time, there would not have been an alternative leader ready to lead the nation. And that is why you need to allow the 1,000 flowers to bloom, and then people will make up their own mind as to which flower they want to pick or choose as to what they believe in. And so that's why freedom, the freedom of expression, is just so fundamentally important to a good, well-functioning society. That said, of course, we should always be civil in our discourse.
The latest news, of course, is that Lyle Shelton, former managing director of the Australian Christian Lobby, and now also a contributor to The Good Source with the weekly Lyle Shelton Show, has himself now been taken to the Queensland human equivalent of the Anti-Discrimination Board because he dared to have the audacity to say that drag queens reading stories to kids in Brisbane City Council premises, libraries, are actually dangerous role models for children. This is, again, just a case of blatant lawfare of people whose feelings have been hurt when criticised politically because of their ideas and values. And of all times, this was like 5 minutes before a Brisbane council election. So it was actually incredibly, in context, political commentary. And now they're seeking to make these laws against discrimination actually shut down completely all political debate. What's the point of even having an election if we're not even allowed to debate the issues? Evelyn, Bernard did a lot of years without any major institutional journalistic support. He had lots of grassroots supporters. My thanks particular go out to them for backing him. I got behind him as best I could, as many people did. Is this, the kind of time where everybody, institutions, media, and everybody need to start pointing at these ridiculous cases of lawfare, such as Lyle is now being has been initiated against Lyle Shelton, and say, not on our watch, we're not going to be quiet about this, and we're going to get behind you with our voices and with our finances?
Yeah, I think the best part about it is that we are the majority. If you speak to everyday Australians, I don't know many who are extreme in their leftist ideologies. There's a very loud minority, but there's actually a lot more of us. So we have a lot more power and means than we give ourselves credit for. So I do think now is the time, while we still are the majority and before legislation does change, not in our favour, now is the time to speak up, to get behind people who think like all of us. And I think it's very dangerous when you look at relativism and subjectivism and you start basing laws off that, because that's basing things off feelings and emotions, and that becomes like the lord of what is going to happen. And I think it's, everybody thinks differently, everybody feels differently, and when you start to, I guess, police those types of things, it's never going to end well, because you might be, people might get behind you on one of your views, but if you have another view and people aren't behind you, you're going to come unstuck. So I think having freedom of speech is extremely important to our way of life, to everything. And unless we make a stand now, it will be too late. Similar to what Senator Abetz was saying with some of the other discussions before, we almost acted too late. And I think it's the same with freedom of speech. We're at the cusp. We need to do it now before it is well and truly legislated, and then we have to backpedal.
Well said.
Yeah. Yes, well said. We did leave it far too late, and I don't know that the right people ever got on board at the right time. In your case, Bernard, I think it's easy to join a winning case, but you've been incredibly courageous and incredibly dogged, and dare I say bloody-minded about your determination to stick to your guns and die on this hill if need be. And I wish there were politicians, more politicians, who were willing to lose for the right reasons, rather than give up their convictions and win for the wrong reasons. And I understand political expediency, but I almost feel embarrassed and apologetic for not more people getting behind you a lot sooner, and am incredibly grateful for your determination to win for, not to win, but to, well, I guess to win, but to fight regardless of guaranteed outcomes or unlikely outcomes. Because you and I have had some private conversations where it seemed like very, very difficult prospects for a good outcome, and yet you've been absolutely persistent. And so I certainly celebrate and applaud that courage, which is the absolute Australian spirit of the Australian soldier. And ironically, the Australian Army kicked you out for it. So thank you very much.
Can I say something? Oh.
Yep, go
Sure,
ahead.
Ev.
Yeah. Sorry, I was just going to say it's actually really important what you did. And honestly, I take my hat off to you because I don't think people understand the importance of case law. So magistrates and judges rely upon case law when they come to their determination. So once something has gone through the court system and there's an outcome and it's recorded, that becomes case law, and future cases rely upon the case law to make their determinations. And magistrates and judges, and I know this is in the criminal system, that determines sentencing, which is huge. And in civil matters, in matters like this, case law is actually a lot bigger than people realize. So the fact that you've gone through all of this for us and for our sake, and now it's case law, your case can be relied upon in the court systems in the future. So it's actually a lot bigger what you've done than people might realize.
Well, thank you very much, both of you, for those comments. Look, there's no way that I would be sitting here tonight after 7 years of battle without the support of the many, many thousands of small, quiet Australians who have backed me, and I'm so grateful to all of them for that. And Evelyn, just one thing on the case law, it is incredibly important, and it's not 100% victory at this stage here, but I think one of the things I'm proudest of is that some of the cases I've won have not just been cases within the system, but they're cases that have proven the system itself is unconstitutional, and I think that's very important. But there's still a way to go.
Senator Abetz, what Bernard just said was that it's something about the system itself being a problem, not just some of the battles within the system that he's won. We're going to wrap up the formal part of the show right now, but don't go away, because we are going to continue for a little while longer. We're going to talk about free speech, the merits of it, why it's good for us, and what exactly free speech is. I think there's a lot of confusion, even amongst conservatives, but certainly amongst lefties, about what free speech is and what it entitles you to, and what conservatives believe it is and entitles you to. We're also going to talk about the lockdown in Victoria and the use of face masks, and Evelyn Rae has some great research about exactly how that's impacting law enforcement, the people who are charged with making these laws stick right now. But I just want to say thank you again to our guests tonight. You can find them on Twitter. We'll just pop up their contact details. Check them out, follow them, find them on your preferred platform, whether it's Parlay or Facebook or YouTube, or head to their website, sign up to their newsletters, and make sure, in particular with Evelyn Rae. Evelyn, do you have your link to Cauldron Pool on your Twitter profile?
Yeah, I believe so. I think it's just in the bio. Okay. Should be there.
I'm just going to see if I can show. There we have it. There is. Anyway, so thank you very much for joining me tonight, Senator Abetz, Evelyn Rae, and Bernard Gaynor.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
For those who are going to stick around or not, don't forget to head to goodsource.news. That's SAUCE, goodsource.news. And you're going to find heaps of great video shows, podcast shows, as well as articles there to keep you informed and up to speed, and with some of the leading conservative voices in Australia that we're helping to amplify. But right now, that's the end of the formal part of the show, and let's head into overtime. Senator Abetz, what's some of the more bizarre things that you've seen, the wrong things that free speech has been argued for, which is not actually what free speech means?
Oh, there's a very good question.
Shall I come back to you?
Yes, something doesn't spring to mind immediately, but look, a lot of...
Let's go with what it is. What is free speech for you? What's the conservative principle value of free speech?
Free speech is that if you believe in freedom of thought, or freedom of conscience, you should also have freedom of speech to give expression to that. And then it's like sharpening yourself be it in the pursuit of scientific endeavour, be it in the pursuit of philosophies, be it in the pursuit of political structures. It is this exchange of ideas, and even sometimes very harsh exchange, that we can learn from each other, glean from each other, and even if we disagree in this generation, the next generation might actually take something on and say, we actually do believe that the world is round because, or we believe that the monarchy should no longer be absolute, but should be a constitutional monarchy subject to an elected democratic parliament. And so you can see an evolution, and I think the United Kingdom has been a good example of that, where there's been a lot of evolutionary development in its institutions without too many wars or revolutions occurring. And so that's the way a good civilized society is able to develop and come to positions that basically have the majority on board. Because if you disenfranchise a person or a group of persons because you don't like what they say, therefore you will shut them down, therefore you will stifle them, therefore you will put them underground, you divide your society. And so what we need is good, robust discussion and then an analysis, David, of what is said, and let's probe, cross-examine it, test it. And that is what ultimately is lacking today, that people want statements to be taken at face value if the emotion or the wokeness is there. And, for example, just recently, black deaths in custody. The simple fact is there's a 0.14% chance of dying in custody if you are Indigenous. There is a 0.18% chance, in other words, a 0.04% greater chance of dying in custody if you are non-Indigenous. That is the fact. Yet you can say that until you are blue in the face, and people will still have their placard up saying black deaths in custody when it is not an issue. The issue is the incarceration rate. And why is there that high incarceration rate? Because they've done the deed. And of course, another demographic
it's an offending
that
rate,
is highly overrepresented in our jail system is Bernard, David, and myself, the white male.
Yeah.
Are we an oppressed minority? No.
Yeah, it's evidence of the feminarchy.
Because we've done it.
The overwhelming majority, disproportionate majority of males in incarceration is clearly evidence of the feminarchy, systemic feminism.
Bias.
Systemic
exactly.
toxic feminism.
We are an oppressed minority.
Okay, so Vandalista Vlogs has said, I would like to hear some examples of wrong ideas of free speech. Okay, so really great, because I hear wrong ideas of free speech all the time. A wrong example of free speech. I am helping, the good source is helping, and I'm producing a show for Mareka Ranci, Political Posting Mama. She was held liable and taken to court because of comments somebody else made on her Facebook page. She's a particular target for uncivil, insincere comments, which perhaps more commonly called trolls, on her Facebook page. And so helping her moderate that now, we're going with a scorched earth policy. If you're uncivil or insincere, bang, you're blocked. You don't get a second chance. Completely gone forever. And it's been suggested that that means I don't really believe in free speech. Wrong example. Wrong example completely. I think that's equivalent to saying me putting a no junk mail sticker on my letterbox is me not really believing in free speech, that I should let anybody put any kind of communication they want on property that I control and have ownership over. Vandalista Blogs, that's an example. If you don't allow somebody to come into your house and graffiti your wall with their swear words and spray paint slogans and horrid little pictures, that doesn't mean you don't believe in free speech, because we've got this tension, this balance between rights. There's always competing rights in a democracy. So you have a right to free speech, but you also have a right to private property. And those two things are held in tension. So for me, the definition of free speech is not a limit on citizens, it's a limit on governments. The government may not tell me what I can and can't say within reasonable bounds. Obviously, we've got laws against fraud and false advertising, but those are reasonable limits, certainly. I think we can all agree that that's an objective, natural law that we've discovered. It's essentially a law against lying. But, you know, Bernard has absolutely no right to tell me what I can or can't say, and vice versa. And if I don't like what Bernard says, the best recourse I have is not to sick the government onto him. That would be a violation of the principles of free speech. What I can do is argue with him, make a coherent case, or walk away and ignore him as irrelevant to me.
Dave, you'd agree with me.
Well, you and I have many Barneys, Bernard, and they're always civil and they're always sincere, which is why I think they're always productive and enjoyed by both of us. Ev, what are your thoughts on free speech? Have you heard any bad arguments, criticisms of free speech, which didn't ring true, or what are your thoughts on how it should be implemented? Where's the line where who gets to decide what hate speech is, for example?
Well, again, I think it comes down to relativism, and I think anybody who adopts that sort of philosophy is in for a downward spiral. I think the important thing to remember with freedom of speech, there is no black or white answer. It is very grey, and it has a ripple effect. So once you police freedom of speech in one area, there's going to have effects that flow on into other areas. And something I try to live by is, and a saying that I sort of say to myself all the time is, make sure you taste your words before you spit them out. And I think if people can adopt that sort of mentality and they, have good morality behind their words, then let it go if you're going to have differences. But like anything, one of the major things I think freedom of speech affects is people's knowledge and the information they're getting and education. And I think once you cap freedom of speech, you stop conversations. And just like the education system for kids at the moment, the problem is kids are being told what to think and not how to think. And I think once you cap off freedom of speech, you're basically creating a society where people don't understand how to think logically and to apply reason to arguments and discussions. And a society without knowledge and without the ability to discuss facts cannot move forward and cannot grow. And it's very dangerous.
There's something like, actually, I'm not going to say that. I'm going to, I tasted it and I'm not going to spit it out.
It's a good one to live by.
It's a good one. I like little sayings like that. Did you make that up, or did you hear it from someone else? Do you have to give credit?
No, I actually made that one up, and I made a little meme for my Twitter. Yeah, that's right. But one thing I will say is that I do think there are some limits to freedom of speech, and by that I mean, for example, threats.
Yeah, where do you think the limits should be?
Well, I think somebody can say, you're a son of a whatsy and I'm going to come and do that. But if there's no practicality or means behind the threat, it's just a block and see you later. I think when the intention behind the words turns into real life and somebody's safety is in imminent danger, or there's a likelihood that it can transpire into physical action, then I think, you can police that. Like I have had death threats on my page, and there's only been 2 in 2 years that I actually had the feeling of, I'm uncomfortable. One of them was told me how I should kill myself. So they didn't actually say directly, I'm going to do it, but they tried to coax me into doing it to myself. And the other person was a bit more direct about it. But I didn't get the police involved with those because even though it was horrible and not nice, I didn't feel there was any real threat behind it. I didn't think that they had any means of doing or following through with their words. So I just sort of did the whole, I reported them, and you know what? Facebook did nothing. I'm not joking. I have it there. They said that doesn't go against our community standards. And I'm just like, what? But, you know, I did what I could do, and I blocked them. And they haven't bothered me. But if somebody said to me, like doxed me and then made those threats, that's a different story, because they've made their intentions known and they've showed that they have the means to follow out those intentions. So that's when I think freedom of speech then ventures into the realm of criminality. But again, I think it's only in those circumstances I would police speech. Otherwise, I think everybody needs to learn how to get thick skin again. And we are raising generations of weak and sensitive children. And it doesn't, it's really frustrating. So I think people need to learn to how to cope.
I'm going to pick up on that point in a second with something, and disagree with something Eric said before. This is always fun when I get to disagree with somebody smarter than me. But I just want to take on this criticism from somebody whose name is Port. This is like a conversation from 2015. We're literally at war with communists from within right now, and yet we're discussing logic and reason. Well, that's because some people are slow learners, Port, and I still have to have these conversations and explain it to people. They don't know what free speech is, and they think blocking trolls on your Facebook page is hypocritical for a free speech advocate. And so the concepts need to be discussed. I'm very happy to make this show high school level because, I mean, one of the most successful videos on my YouTube channel was explaining how preferences work in the Senate. This should be high school education, and yet it was exceptionally well received and highly shared because it's not common knowledge. So I'm happy to keep having conversations from 2015 or 1915 over and over again. And there's a lot of wisdom in those old conversations. Speaking of old conversations, Senator Abetz, you mentioned, and I don't know how strongly you hold to this view, but you essentially quoted Justice Wendell Holmes, who said that you shouldn't be able to yell fire in a crowded theatre. I'm not 100% sure, but I think he also was a fan of eugenics. So I don't take everything he says as good law. And I actually strongly disagree. I think that's a ridiculous ruling. Of course you should be able to yell fire in a crowded theatre. And what this is an example of to me is paternalism. Like, if you're in a movie and it's crowded and somebody yells out fire, do you really think, what percentage of people do you think are going to panic and stampede out of there? I don't think there's going to be very many people. I think people are quite capable of being level-headed and rational, and there might be one or two people who lose it. But I think this is a problem with free speech laws going far too far, that there's this degree of paternalism in there, which is trying to protect people from having to use their own judgment. And it fails to trust people to use their own good judgment. And it presumes they're going to be childish and irrational and hysterical when somebody says something that perhaps they shouldn't have said if they themselves were more mature and more sincere. Your thoughts?
Look, I hear what you say. Counter to that, I would put to you that if you're supposed to analyse everything very carefully, then of course a lot of the false advertising, you would say, look, what a mug for being sucked in by that assertion. Any mug could tell that that was never going to be delivered on. And so, is that paternalistic to say that there should be a law against false advertising or false representation? So no right is an absolute right other than one's right to life and things of that nature. But when it comes to freedom of speech, freedom of religion, I cannot start a religion tomorrow saying that everybody that's got the first name of David should be locked up in jail. That
Hallelujah.
most people would say that, look, interesting, but no, we won't accept that. So it's got to be within parameters. That's why we have defamation laws. That is why we also have laws against deliberate misrepresentations. Indeed, that is why we have a law against perjury, lying under oath. So there are limitations, and I think it is highly irresponsible in a crowded theatre if people were unable to tell whether or not a fire had started somewhere, to shout a fire, because that is at a minimum an absolute public nuisance, and could in fact lead to death. But that said, the question in all these things is, where do you draw the line? And just because I feel uncomfortable by how you've described my skin colour or the shape of my eyes or whatever, is it untidy? Is it unacceptable? Should it be discouraged? Absolutely. But should there be laws against it? That is where I think we have to be exceptionally careful, because one person's descriptor of whatever it might be, or firmly held belief, might then become somebody else's hate speech. So, for example, and I'll finish on this, the Archbishop in Tasmania was hauled before the Tasmanian anti-discrimination body for the simple reason that he put out a document authorised by every single other Catholic Archbishop in Australia as to the Catholic Church's teaching on marriage at a time before the law was actually changed. So they were upholding the law of the land and saying that the current law of the land was fully in line with Catholic Church teaching, and he got dragged before a tribunal. Sure, the case got dropped, but if an archbishop can be dragged before such a tribunal, good luck to, let's say, a tradesman who wanted to write a letter to the editor asserting that. They are stifled, and that's what's happening today. That too many people are being stifled because they see what happens to the likes of the Bernard Gaynors of this world, and to the likes of the Archbishop, and to the likes of Lyle Shelton.
Yeah. There's more fun to have on that one, but I would like to wrap up over time.
Can I
oh, yes, sorry, Bernard. Jump in.
I know the good senator can't hear me, but I just want to make a point about
We'll transcribe notes for Senator Abetz as you talk.
Yes.
The purpose, there is a reason we have this thing called free speech, and it's so we can help to understand the truth of things, which is why the examples we've just spoken about, such as perjury and fraud, etc., are wrong, because they, in their essence, it's about telling lies. So free speech is about telling the truth. So it is perfectly fine to yell fire in a theatre if there is a fire in the theatre, because you should be able to tell the truth. Now, the problem with anti-discrimination laws, as opposed to laws against perjury, is that they are not policed in the criminal system. They are policed in an arbitrary, partisan, political system. And within the laws themselves, there are no protections for telling the truth. In fact, the truth is irrelevant when it comes to assessing whether or not your statement is considered hate speech. That's why these anti-discrimination industries are evil, and they should be bulldozed as far as I'm concerned, because they have got nothing to do with finding the truth of things and everything to do with imposing a particular partisan political view.
I don't know where to begin to summarize that, so we might just move on to the next topic. But there might be some fun comments for you to, as you watch this back, Senator Abetz. I want to have a chat with Evelyn, or Evelyn have a chat with us. Your journalistic contacts in Victorian police force have given you some insight. I'd like you to share with us. I have no idea what you're about to say, but it's a terrible way to be a lawyer, but it's fine on a YouTube channel. What kind of challenges are the police facing in Victoria at the moment? Between the lines, without mentioning any names, are they loving these laws, hating them, and how are they enjoying the job at the moment? I can't imagine trying to fine people $200 for not covering their face.
Yeah. Look, I think it's really difficult times for citizens, like civilians like us, and police as well. I will just say that I do think there are some, how do I put this? There is, I think Victoria Police need to have a lot reformed. If you can read between my lines, I don't necessarily think they are a very integral or impartial organisation at the moment, but there are some really decent police officers who are caught up in the politics of not only COVID, but of internal struggles within the police force. And someone I was speaking to who works down there at the moment, they sort of are under the pressure from their hierarchy to implement all of these mask wearing restrictions, but they are not really given much information. So the police themselves, from what I've been told, it's the legislation and the public health orders, because they're constantly changing and being updated at the moment. Police aren't really informed or educated well enough when they're sort of approached or confronted by these sovereign citizens who are, you've seen all of the videos that are sort of up at the moment on social media where people are deliberately going into situations to try to get past a police border or something like that. The police officer that I'm friends with down there has sort of told me that it's very challenging because everything inside of them as a person is absolutely hating having to enforce these laws, but it's really hard for the police in Victoria, the good ones, to use their discretion because people are coming heavy-handed in the situation with cameras rolling, live feeds. So the police are on display not only to the people of Australia, but to their bosses. So they're in a really difficult situation. If people weren't coming to police, deliberately provoking them and trying to film situations where they can get police unstuck, police, the good police that are down there, might be actually able to use their discretion and go, I don't want to do this. Look, just go, just get in your car and just go. Let's just leave it at that, like use their discretion. But because people are coming in with their cameras straight away, it's really hard for them to actually use their discretion because at the end of the day, they've got to do their job, and the information they're being fed from their bosses is that because of the Public Health Act, these health orders that are issued by the chief medical officer are enacted and enforceable. So there's all these people out there with the constitutional laws, and I don't want to get into that, my own opinions on that, but I will just say the police who are good police who are down there are really struggling because they do sympathize and almost agree with these sovereign citizens and what they're saying, but they're in a position where they're being told by their bosses that this is law and their job is to enforce the law and to uphold the law. So it's really difficult, and I feel really
cops at any risk legally if they're following orders, but the orders from the senior commissioned ranks aren't actually legally valid? Are they personally liable, or can they go, hey, I was relying on best information by my superiors?
So they can be personally held liable. But so basically when you're a beat cop and you're on the street, you have discretion. It's part of the police handbook. You have the ability to use your discretion, but it has to be within the law. There are some things that you can't use your discretion that are quite black and white. There are some circumstances where you can be given a direction from like an inspector or a superintendent or above, those sorts of ranks. So you can be given a direction to do something and you have to. In terms of these public health orders and these emergency procedures acts and things like that, I'm not familiar with Victoria and whether a senior officer is able to give that sort of order. But it's really hard because unless you understand the culture of the police and the hierarchy, it's really hard to sympathise with the police. As a junior police officer, you kind of just keep your mouth shut and do what the senior officer tells you to do. It sounds horrible. And
sorry, I'm laughing because somebody on YouTube comments has just said that their comment was removed and they thought we believed in free speech. I guess they've just joined the conversation.
Okay.
Sorry, it was a bit distracting and certainly off topic from what you were talking about. Like my experience with cops in Victoria has been with inspector level and below, and I've found all of them fair-minded and reasonable people. And this was when I was dealing with Antifa threats while holding a free speech event in Melbourne, and hundreds of riot police were required to hold the lawless fascists at bay outside the premises. And certainly from Lisa Neville, the Victorian Police Minister, there was copious amounts of hostility towards my event and being sent a bill for the police resources, which was nothing short of an intended deterrent. And we actually have comments from some police officers who were under the impression that that was intended to make us go away and just not come to Victoria. That was very political. So there's this culture, certainly in the very high...
They've got COVID now for that.
Yeah, they've got COVID now for that.
That's right.
Yeah. Look, for the comments going on YouTube about comment removal, only rude stuff is going to get removed. And if you weird things going on in comments, there's something about 51 being an inappropriate comment. I don't even know what that means, but sorry. No, I think there was some sort of semi-profane username before, which I blocked from the channel because that's just weird. But anyway, comment away. It's fun. The more the merrier. Look, there was one last topic and it's completely gone from my mind. Senator Abetz, constitutionally, the question Sandra Lewis asked before was, is this becoming a constitutional issue? The compulsory wearing of face masks and fining. Your thoughts. How would you answer Sandra's question?
If in normal circumstances the government were to require you to wear a face mask, I would imagine the courts would rule against that. But in the current circumstance where we have a pandemic, where there is a very strong medical argument that it is a good idea to wear a face mask, in the current circumstances, my view is that the courts would allow it. But that said, never try to...
Is that revisionist or originalist?
Well, that is on the basis of the law being flexible and sensible in all the circumstances. And we have rights, but they are not absolute. And I would have thought most of us would agree that we should be allowed to walk around without masks. But in the event that you have a pandemic, which potentially could kill hundreds of us, if not thousands of us, prejudice people's long-term health, etc., and our hospitals couldn't cope, in that case, the government of the day can put those restrictions on us, albeit for as short a period of time as possible and only for as long as necessary.
Awesome. Let's wrap it up, guys. Bernard, your final thoughts for the evening on any topic.
Oh, any topic. Well, I'll keep on the topic we've been on.
Perhaps the topics we've talked about in the last 90 minutes.
No, look, I'll just say once again, thank you to everybody who's assisted me throughout the last 7 years. There's still a way to go, but I'm very grateful to all of them. I'm grateful to you, Dave. You've been of great assistance to me through various means over the last 7 years, and you know what they are, and I appreciate that.
Yep. Senator Abetz, Bernard basically commented, thanks to everyone for... I'm sorry you can't hear him tonight. It's so bizarre that you can hear the two of us and not him. It must be divine protection against too many Queenslanders. However, he was basically saying thanks to all his supporters for the support over the last 7 years of his fight for justice. But your final thoughts, any parting things you want to share with the audience tonight?
Look, thanks for listening. Thanks for Pellowe Talk. Thank you for the co-contributors, panelists, and our freedoms are worth fighting for. Never take them for granted. And that is why you can't just rely on Pellowe Talk or people like Bernard Gaynor or Evelyn or myself. We all have to be in this.
So true.
We have to be brazen advocates for the fundamental freedoms that have made our society what she is, and that is the envy of the world. And I don't see many people trying to flee Australia, but I see a stack of people wanting to flee their homelands to come to Australia. And for me, that tells me everything I need to know about how good things are in Australia. Can we improve? Of course we should. And that's why we need freedom of speech to keep discussing these things, to make ourselves even better. But the things we have are definitely worth protecting. And that's why I enjoy being able to be part of a show such as this, to try to encourage others to get on board in the fight to maintain our freedoms.
Thank you, Senator Abetz. It's wonderful having you on there. And somebody in the comments said thank you to everyone, even the Tasmanian. We love Tasmania. We love you guys. We've saved the best to last.
Can I tell you we're very thankful for Bass Strait at the moment.
I bet you are. I bet you are. Evelyn, your final thoughts for the evening?
I guess my final thought for the evening is I think cancel culture is no longer a thing, because I think it's turned into revenge culture. And I think because everything is so based on emotions and feelings and not facts, that's what fuels anger and rage, which transpires into I'm going to say hashtag revenge culture. It's no longer cancel culture. It's digressed, and it's now a more dangerous beast. So we have to be careful.
Yeah, well, interesting. Done. Let's see if that takes off. You heard it here first on or maybe not first, but if you haven't heard it anywhere before, you did hear it here first. Pellowe Talk Live, hashtag revenge culture. Have you been using it on your Twitter timeline already, Evelyn?
Well, because I actually tweeted it. I think it was one of the last tweets I did. I did something about cancel culture and I put it up there. But yeah, that's all. That's about it.
All right. Oh, there it is. There it is. 3 hours ago. Revenge culture. There we go. Seen it. All right. You saw it here second on Pellowe Talk Live. Very good. All right. Thank you, everyone, for your contributions tonight, and to the audience, thank you for your comments. Even the spammers. Spam's okay. Trolling, not so much. But if you would like more Pellowe Talk, just watch again. Facebook, YouTube, 8 p.m. every Tuesday night live. We've got great lineups every week. And you can also subscribe to updates there. It'd be good to get on the newsletter. You never know when the corporate giants are going to shut down conservative voices. Best thing to be on mailing lists. Also, we would love your support. If you can contribute a small amount each month, that will help increase the production. There's a number of shows and growing number of shows. I think we're up to about 10 different weekly shows on The Good Source, which are essentially coming to you via the multimedia of video and audio podcasts. The James McPherson Show is a very, very good weekly podcast. Came out this morning, comes out Tuesday mornings. So subscribe to the podcast channels on there. But there's always plenty of personalities, and don't forget to follow these three guys. You've seen the Twitter details all night, and check out their websites, Senator Eric Abetz, Evelyn Rae, and Bernard Gaynor. Thank you very much, and that's it for this evening's episode, and we will see you next week. Bye-bye, everyone.
Good night.
Bye.